The cafeteria of Galactic Academy Station 7 hummed with the conversations of 100 different species. Zix pressed himself against the wall, trying to make his thin frame even smaller. His stomach made a sound like grinding metal, a noise unique to his species, the Vorthak. It was loud enough that several students at nearby tables turned to look. Listen to that! A Krellian student with blue scales pointed at Zix. The scavenger's stomach is singing again. Laughter rippled through the group. Zix's gray skin flushed darker with embarrassment. He clutched his empty lunch tray tighter, the plastic creaking under his four-fingered grip. Maybe if your people hadn't lost the trade wars, you'd have credits for food, another student called out. This one was a Nexari, tall and elegant with crystalline skin that caught the artificial light. Zix wanted to explain that it wasn't about credits. His family had enough for basic rations, but Vorthak biology was different. They needed to eat every few hours or their bodies would begin consuming their own muscle tissue. It was an evolutionary trait from their harsh home world where food was scarce and bodies had adapted to extreme efficiency. But explaining would only invite more mockery. The grinding sound came again, louder this time. A group of Altarian students started mimicking the noise, their throat sacs inflating to create an exaggerated version of his stomach's protest. He's going to waste away right here in the cafeteria. Someone call maintenance, we'll need to sweep up the dust. Zix's eyes, all 6 of them, began to water. Not from sadness, Vorthak didn't cry like other species, but from the stress hormones flooding his system. He turned to leave, abandoning any hope of finding someone willing to share their meal. That's when he collided with someone carrying a fully loaded tray. The impact sent dishes clattering, though the person managed to catch most of them with surprising reflexes. Zix looked up, mortified, expecting another round of insults. Instead, he found himself looking at a human student he'd never seen before. The human was average height for his species, with dark hair and skin that suggested Earth's African regions. His eyes, only 2, like all humans, studied Zix with an expression the young Vorthak couldn't quite read. Sorry, Zix whispered, his translator unit crackling with his distress. I didn't mean to dash you, okay? The human's voice was deep, concerned. He set his tray on a nearby table and really looked at Zix. You seem upset. I'm fine. The lie came automatically. Zix had learned that most species didn't really want to know when someone wasn't fine. His stomach chose that moment to protest again, the grinding sound seeming to echo off the cafeteria walls. The human's eyebrows, those strange hair strips that humans had above their eyes, drew together. When did you last eat? Zix looked away. Yesterday. Morning. A sharp intake of breath. That's over 30 hours ago. 32, Zix corrected quietly. But, it's fine. I'm used to it. Used to it? The human's voice carried something Zix had rarely heard directed at him, genuine anger, but not at him. At the situation. What do you mean you're used to it? Before Zix could respond, the human was pushing his loaded tray forward. Here. Eat. Zix stepped back so fast he nearly fell. I can't take your food. Why not? Because. Zix struggled to find words. In Vorthak culture, taking food from someone was seen as theft, even if offered. It was a survival trait from generations of scarcity. I just can't. The human pulled out a chair. Sit. But, sit. It wasn't a command so much as a firm suggestion. Something in the human's tone made Zix obey. The human pushed the tray between them. We'll share. That's acceptable in your culture, right? Sharing a meal together? Zix's 6 eyes widened. The human had done his research. Sharing a meal as equals was indeed acceptable, though no one at the academy had ever offered before. Yes, but why? The human had already divided the strange earth food, something called a sandwich, cut precisely in half. There were also what looked like fried tubers and a container of green vegetation. Because you're hungry, the human said simply. And I have food. It's not complicated. But it was complicated. Zix watched in amazement as the human took a bite of his half of the sandwich, making it socially acceptable for Zix to eat the other half. The first bite sent waves of relief through his system. The grinding stopped. "I'm Marcus, by the way," the human said between bites. "Marcus Chan. Just transferred here from Earth Station Beta." Zix, he managed through a mouthful of the wonderful sandwich. The flavors were strange but welcome. Zix Teleran. "Nice to meet you, Zix. So, want to tell me why you're going hungry at the best-funded academy in 3 sectors? Zix swallowed carefully. The food was already helping, his body's emergency protocols standing down. "My meal card only works for breakfast and dinner. The academy says that's standard for all students." Marcus frowned. "But Vorthack need to eat more frequently than most species." "You know about Vorthack biology?" "I had a Vorthack roommate back on Beta Station. Guy nearly passed out during orientation because he was too polite to mention he needed more meals than the standard allocation." Marcus pushed the container of green things salad, his translator supplied, toward Zix. "The administration here seriously doesn't provide species-specific meal plans? They say it would be too complicated. Too expensive." Zix carefully took some of the salad, making sure to leave exactly half. "There are only 3 Vorthack students here. We're not priority." The grinding sound from earlier was replaced by contented humming, another Vorthack trait. Zix flushed again, but Marcus smiled. "That's a happy sound, right? Like when humans hum while eating? How do you know so much about us?" Marcus shrugged. "Humans are curious. It's kind of our thing. Plus, my roommate on Beta, Vex, became one of my best friends. He taught me a lot." His expression darkened. "Including how often your people get overlooked or dismissed because of the trade war stigma." "It's not stigma," Zix said quietly. "It's punishment. My people lost. This is what happens when you lose." "Bullshit." The word was sharp, and Zix flinched. Marcus immediately softened his tone. "Sorry. Not mad at you. Mad at the situation. No kid should go hungry because of politics." Kid. Zix was technically an adult by Vorthack standards, having passed his 15th cycle, but, to humans who live twice as long, he supposed he was still young. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Other students kept glancing over, clearly surprised to see someone voluntarily sitting with the scavenger. Zix tried not to notice. "Here's what we're going to do," Marcus announced suddenly. "Every day, lunchtime, we meet here. I'll get extra food, I've got plenty of credits, and we share meals. Properly, so it's culturally appropriate for you. I can't ask you to dash, you're not asking. I'm offering. Big difference." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Besides, I need a friend here. Someone to help me navigate this place." "Fair trade?" "A friend." Zix turned the word over in his mind. He'd had packmates back home, but friends were different. "Friends chose you." "I don't understand," Zix admitted. "Why would you want to be friends with me? I'm just a Vorthack." "We're not." He gestured vaguely at the cafeteria full of more impressive species. Marcus grinned. "You know what's funny? Humans used to ask the same question when we first joined the galactic community. Why would anyone want to ally with the weird bipedal apes from the unfashionable end of the Orion arm?" He leaned forward conspiratorially. "Turns out, being underestimated is sometimes an advantage. And humans have this thing about rooting for underdogs." "What's an underdog?" "Someone others think will lose, but who has more fight in them than anyone expects." Marcus started gathering the empty containers. "Something tells me you've got plenty of fight, Zix. You've been going hungry rather than beg, standing tall even when they mock you. That's strength." Zix felt something unfamiliar warming in his chest, not just from the food. "The others will mock you too, for associating with me." "Let them try. There was something in Marcus's grin that reminded Zix of the predator species humans had evolved from. I've got some opinions about their behavior I'd be happy to share. For the first time in months, Zix felt his mouth parts arrange themselves in what his people considered a smile. It probably looked terrifying to most species, all sharp edges and too many teeth, but Marcus just smiled back. Same time tomorrow, the human asked. Same time tomorrow, Zix agreed. As they left the cafeteria together, Zix's stomach quiet and, content for the first time in days, he noticed the stairs following them. But, somehow, with Marcus walking beside him like it was the most natural thing in the world, the stairs didn't sting quite as much. He didn't know it yet, but this simple shared meal would be the first of many. And, in the weeks to come, the entire academy would learn exactly why humans had gone from newcomers to one of the most influential species in the galaxy in just a few short decades. It wasn't their technology or their military might, though they had both. It was something far simpler and far more powerful, their ability to see potential where others saw weakness, to offer friendship where others offered scorn, and to stand up for what was right, even when it was easier to look away. But that was still to come. For now, there was just a human and a Vorthack, walking through the corridors of a space station, talking about classes and teachers and the terrible food in the cafeteria, except for the sandwiches, which Zix declared were the best thing he'd ever tasted. And, in the reflection of the viewport windows, against the backdrop of 1,000 stars, Marcus caught sight of their shadows walking side by side, so different in shape and size, yet somehow perfectly matched in stride. Word spread through Galactic Academy Station 7 like wildfire. The human, Marcus Chen, had not only shared a meal with the Vorthack scavenger, but continued to do so every single day. What started as curious glances in the cafeteria evolved into open speculation and, for some, growing hostility. It had been 2 weeks since that first shared lunch, and Zix could already feel the difference in his body. His gray skin had taken on a healthier sheen, and the constant fatigue that had plagued him was gone. He stood straighter, moved with more confidence. The regular meals were healing more than just his body. "You're looking good," Marcus commented as they sat at what had become their regular table. He'd brought extra food again, he always did, somehow knowing that Zix's metabolism would burn through a normal portion too quickly. "I feel good," Zix admitted, carefully dividing a strange earth fruit called an apple. The crunch it made between his teeth was satisfying. "My scores in physical training have improved by 30%. Just PT?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. Zix's 6 eyes sparkled with what humans might recognize as mischief. "My theoretical mathematics scores have increased by 45%. Turns out it's easier to calculate interdimensional jump coordinates when your brain isn't eating itself for fuel." Marcus laughed, the sound drawing attention from nearby tables. Who would have thought that feeding kids helps them learn better? Revolutionary concept. The sarcasm wasn't lost on Zix. He'd learned that humans used it as both weapon and shield, pointing out absurdities while protecting themselves from the emotional weight of injustice. Their conversation was interrupted by a shadow falling across their table. Corax, the Krellian who had mocked Zix that first day, stood there with his usual group of followers. His blue scales shifted color with his mood, currently a deep purple that signaled aggression. Well. The human and his pet are having lunch again." Corax's voice dripped contempt. "Tell me, human, does it amuse you to feed strays? Or are you conducting some kind of experiment?" Marcus didn't look up from his meal. "The only experiment here is seeing how long you can stand there before I get bored of your voice." The casual dismissal made Corax's scales flush darker. "You don't understand the social order here, human. Your species is too new, too naive. You don't realize what associating with losers will cost you." Now Marcus did look up, and Zix saw something in his friend's eyes that made him glad humans were omnivores rather than pure predators. "Cost me? Like what, the approval of someone who gets his kicks from watching others go hungry? That's not a cost, that's a benefit." "The Vorthack are weak," Corax insisted. "They lost the trade wars because they couldn't compete. Natural selection at work. The strong survive, the weak, well." He gestured dismissively at Zix. Marcus stood slowly, and, despite being shorter than the Krellian, something about his posture made Korax take a step back.
You want to talk about natural selection? Let's talk about cooperation.
Let's talk about how humans went from cave dwellers to interstellar travelers in less time than most species take to develop written language.
You know how we did it? Korax didn't answer, but he couldn't seem to look away either. We figured out that a tribe is stronger than an individual.
That feeding the hungry means they can contribute.
That teaching the ignorant creates innovators.
That lifting others up raises everyone. Marcus's voice was calm, conversational even, but it carried through the suddenly quiet cafeteria.
Your species has been spacefaring for, what, 3,000 years? And you're still stuck on might makes right playground politics. You dare lecture me about dash? I'm not lecturing. I'm observing.
Marcus sat back down, returning to his meal as if Korax wasn't there.
Natural selection doesn't favor the strongest.
It favors the most adaptable. And nothing is more adaptable than a diverse community working together. Korax's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came. Finally, he spun on his heel and stalked away, his followers trailing behind like confused puppies. The cafeteria remained quiet for a long moment before conversations gradually resumed.
Zix stared at his friend in amazement. You just faced down a Krellian. They're apex predators on their world.
Were, Marcus corrected, taking another bite of his sandwich.
Now they're just bullies with good dental plans. He noticed Zix's expression and softened. You okay? No one has ever stood up for me like that before. Get used to it.
Marcus pushed the dessert, something called a brownie, toward Zix.
That's what friends do.
As they finished their meal, a small figure approached their table hesitantly. Zix recognized her as Illa, one of the other Vorthack students. She was even thinner than Zix had been, her 6 eyes darting nervously between them. I'm sorry to interrupt, she whispered, her translator barely picking up her voice.
But, I heard, is it true? You share meals?
Before Zix could respond, Marcus was already dividing his remaining food into thirds.
Plenty for everyone. Sit down, Illa, right?
She nodded rapidly, sinking into a chair as if her legs could no longer support her.
The breakfast allocation ran out early this morning. I haven't eaten since yesterday afternoon. The breakfast ran out?
Marcus's voice was dangerously quiet.
How does a scheduled meal run out?
It happens sometimes, Illa said, accepting her portion with shaking hands. The automated systems don't account for species with faster metabolisms.
By the time we reach the front of the line.
She shrugged, a gesture she'd clearly learned from watching other species. Marcus pulled out his communication device and started typing rapidly.
What are you doing? Zix asked. Sending a message to my mother. At their confused looks, he elaborated. She's the human ambassador to the Galactic Education Council.
She's been looking for exactly this kind of systemic discrimination to address.
You can't. Illa squeaked. We'll be targeted even more. You're already being targeted. You're being starved. Marcus's fingers never stopped moving across the screen. The difference is, now someone's going to do something about it.
Over the next few days, things began to change. More human students started sitting with them at lunch, each bringing extra food to share.
Then, a few Altarians joined, the same species that had mocked Zix before.
They came with apologies and offerings of their home world's fruits, which turned out to be compatible with Vorthack digestion. I didn't realize, one of them said during a particularly crowded lunch. Their table had grown from 2 to 15 in the span of a week.
When everyone else was laughing, it was easy to laugh too.
But, watching you stand up to Korax, calling out the system, it made me think. The changes weren't just social.
Marcus's mother had apparently raised hell at the Education Council.
Within 2 weeks, the cafeteria implemented a new system with species-specific nutritional requirements programmed in. No one would go hungry because of biological needs again.
But not everyone was happy with the changes. Corax and his followers grew increasingly aggressive, accidentally bumping into Zix in the corridors, making snide comments about human pets and charity cases. Marcus's human friends started walking with Zix between classes, a casual protection that somehow made the threats feel less frightening. The confrontation came to a head during advanced xenobiology. Professor Ural, a mantis-like Zolorian, was discussing behavioral adaptations when Corax raised his hand. "Professor, isn't it true that some species develop dependent relationships when they can't survive on their own? Parasitism, I believe it's called?" The professor's compound eyes shifted. "That is one type of symbiotic relationship, yes. Though parasitism specifically refers to a relationship where one organism benefits at the expense of the other." Exactly. Corax's scales shimmered with satisfaction. Like certain species that can't even feed themselves properly without begging from others. Before the professor could respond, Marcus raised his hand. "Actually, Professor, I think what we're seeing is mutualism, not parasitism." "Elaborate, Mr. Chen." Marcus stood, addressing the class rather than just the professor. "In mutualism, both species benefit. For example, on Earth, we have cleaner fish that feed on parasites on larger fish. The small fish get food, the large fish get health benefits. Both win." He glanced at Zix. "Or consider human pack bonding behaviors. We're psychologically driven to form connections across species barriers. It's why we domesticated wolves, befriended cats, and why we're one of the few species to keep pets from other worlds." "Your point?" "My point is that when I share meals with Zix and Illa, I'm not losing anything. I'm gaining friends, learning about Vorthack culture, improving my Vorthack language skills, and satisfying my species' deep-seated need to nurture and protect pack members." He looked directly at Corax. "The only parasitism I see here is from those who feed their egos by stepping on others." The class erupted in whispers. Professor Ural clicked her mandibles, the Zolorian equivalent of applause. "An excellent example of applied xenobiology, Mr. Chun. 5 points to your academic record." Corax's scales had turned almost black with rage. After class, he cornered Marcus and Zix in an empty corridor, bringing 3 of his largest followers. "You think you're clever, human? You think your words mean anything here?" He loomed over them, his natural weapons, retractable claws designed for rending flesh, sliding partially from their sheaths. "Your species might be new to space, but we've been apex predators for millennia." "And yet," Marcus said calmly, not backing down despite the obvious threat, "here you are, 4 against 2, trying to intimidate us in an empty hallway. Doesn't seem very apex to me." "Seems scared." "Scared?" Corax laughed, the sound like grinding glass. "Of a soft human and a half-starved Vorthack?" "Scared of change," Marcus clarified. "Scared that if the weak species get fair treatment, you might have to actually work for your position instead of coasting on intimidation." The claws extended fully. "Perhaps I should show you what Krellian strength really means." "Perhaps you should." Everyone turned. A new figure stood at the corridor's end, another human, but this one wore the uniform of station security. Zix recognized him as Commander Torres, head of the human security contingent. "Please," Torres continued, his hand resting casually on his sidearm. "Assault 2 students in front of witnesses. See how that plays out for your academic career." "What witnesses?" Corax sneered. Torres tapped his temple, where a small recording device blinked red. "Every human security officer on this station has been recording their patrols since certain reports of harassment reached our ears. Amazing what technology can capture." He stepped closer. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to retract those claws, apologize to these students, and walk away. Or I file a report that will have you expelled faster than you can say apex predator." For a moment, the corridor was silent except for the hum of the station's life support. Then, slowly, Corax's claws retracted. His apology was barely audible, forced through clenched teeth, but it was given. He and his followers retreated, shooting venomous looks over their shoulders. "Thanks," Marcus said to Torres. The commander shrugged. Humans look after their own.
And, as far as we're concerned, anyone who breaks bread with us is family.
He nodded to Zix. You need anything, you let us know.
After he left, Zix turned to Marcus in wonder.
Your people would really protect me? Even though I'm not human?
Especially because you're not human, Marcus said. Like I told the class, pack bonding is kind of our superpower.
Once you're in the pack, you're in for life. That evening, Zix received a message on his personal device.
It was from the third Vorthack student, Helix, who he'd barely spoken to before.
Heard what happened today. Could I join you for lunch tomorrow?
He showed the message to Marcus, who grinned.
Tell him yes.
And, tell him to bring anyone else who's been going hungry.
Human security is already on alert, might as well make the most of it.
You're going to feed the entire station at this rate, Zix said, but he was smiling in the Vorthack way, all teeth and joy.
Nah, Marcus laughed. Just until the systems change. But systems don't change on their own. Someone has to push them. Might as well be us.
The next day, their lunch table had to expand to accommodate 20 students from 7 different species. Korax and his followers ate in sullen silence on the far side of the cafeteria, isolated by their own choices. And, in her office high above, the station administrator, an ancient Valan who had run the academy for 2 centuries, watched the security feeds with interest. She'd seen species come and go, watched the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations.
But, these humans, they were different.
They didn't conquer through strength or technology. They conquered through something far more insidious and unstoppable, compassion that spread like a virus, turning enemies into allies, weakness into strength, individuals into pack. She made a note in her personal log, the humans are going to change everything. She was right. 6 months had passed since Marcus Chen first shared his lunch with Zix Teleran. What started as a simple act of kindness had evolved into something that would be studied in xenosociology classes for generations to come, though none of them knew it yet. The cafeteria was unrecognizable from those early days. Long tables had replaced the small, isolated ones, encouraging different species to sit together. The food service had been completely overhauled, with multiple stations catering to different biological needs. A large sign in 17 languages proclaimed, "Nutrition is a right, not a privilege." But, the biggest change was in the students themselves.
Zix. Marcus.
Over here. The call came from a mixed table where Illa sat with 3 humans, 2 Altarians, an Exari, and even a young Krellian, though not one of Korax's group.
They'd saved seats, as always.
Zix moved through the cafeteria with confidence now, his stride sure and strong. Regular meals had transformed him physically, but the social changes ran deeper.
He wasn't the scavenger anymore. He was the student who'd sparked the nutrition rights movement, though he still felt uncomfortable with the title. Big news, Illa said as they sat down.
She was practically vibrating with excitement, her 6 eyes bright.
The Vorthack Trade Council received our petition. They're sending a representative to the academy. The table erupted in celebration.
For months, they'd been working on a formal request to renegotiate the trade restrictions that had economically crippled the Vorthack people. What started as Marcus helping Zix write a letter had grown into a station-wide initiative, with students from dozens of species contributing research, economic models, and support statements.
That's amazing.
Marcus high-fived Zix, a gesture the Vorthack had learned to appreciate despite having only 4 fingers.
When do they arrive?
3 days, Zix said, still processing the news. They want to meet with what they're calling the Coalition of United Students.
He made the Vorthack gesture for amusement. I think someone's been reading too many human history files. Hey, if the name fits. Marcus grinned.
Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the station's communication system.
All students please report to the main assembly hall for an urgent announcement from Administrator Yolan. The elderly Valan rarely addressed the entire student body. Whispers of speculation followed them as hundreds of students filed into the vast assembly hall.
Zix noticed Korax and his remaining followers clustered in a corner, looking unusually subdued.
Administrator Yolan took the stage, her ancient form moving with surprising grace. Students of Galactic Academy Station 7.
6 months ago, an incident occurred in our cafeteria that I have been monitoring with great interest. Zix felt his stomach tighten, the old anxiety response still triggered by attention, even positive attention. Marcus bumped his shoulder supportively. A young Vorthack was going hungry due to systematic failures in our institution.
A young human chose to help.
This simple act has catalyzed changes not just in our academy, but across the entire Education Council network. She paused, her multifaceted eyes seeming to look at each student individually. Today, I announced that the Galactic Education Council has unanimously approved the Universal Student Welfare Protocol, ensuring species-appropriate nutrition, accommodation, and support for all students regardless of their world's economic or political status. The cheers were deafening. Students hugged across species barriers that would have seemed insurmountable just months before. Zix felt tears, actual tears, a physiological response his species had thought evolution had removed.
He wasn't the only one.
Furthermore, Yolan continued when the noise died down, the council has established the Chantella Fellowship, named for the two students who reminded us that education is about lifting each other up, not tearing each other down.
This fellowship will provide full funding for economically disadvantaged students from any species to attend academy. Marcus looked stunned. They named it after us?
You changed everything, Zix said softly.
You changed me.
We changed each other, Marcus corrected.
After the assembly, they found themselves on the observation deck, looking out at the stars.
Word had spread through the human networks about the fellowship announcement, and Marcus's communicator hadn't stopped pinging with congratulations. My mother says the Vorthack representative wants to meet you specifically, Marcus said, reading one message.
Apparently, you've become something of a symbol back home. The young Vorthack who refused to beg, who maintained dignity even while suffering.
I was just hungry, Zix said quietly.
And scared. And alone. No. You were surviving. There's honor in that. Marcus leaned against the viewport. You know what the funny thing is? Humans have been there.
Different times, different places, but we've been the hungry ones, the discriminated ones, the ones told we didn't belong.
Maybe that's why we recognize it so quickly in others.
They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching ships dock and depart from the station. The variety of vessels from different worlds was stunning: sleek Altarian cruisers, massive Krellian battleships, the organic-looking Vorthack traders that had only recently been allowed back in major space lanes. Incoming, Marcus muttered, and Zix turned to see Corax approaching.
The Krellian looked different.
His scales, usually bright with aggression or superiority, were muted to almost gray.
He stopped a respectful distance away, his posture lacking its usual arrogance.
I owe you an apology, he said without preamble.
Both of you. Zix's 6 eyes widened in shock. Krellian culture didn't do apologies, they saw them as weakness.
My younger sibling, Corax continued, his voice strained, has a metabolic disorder.
Rare in our species. She needs to eat every few hours, like the Vorthack. My family hid it, ashamed of the weakness. But, seeing the changes here, seeing that getting help isn't shameful. He trailed off, struggling with words. She starts academy next year.
Thanks to what you've done, she won't suffer in silence.
I'm glad, Marcus said simply. No one should. Corax shifted uncomfortably. I was wrong. About strength, about survival, about everything. My people respect power, but I only understood one kind. You've shown me another. He straightened, meeting their eyes directly. If you'll permit it, I'd like to join your coalition.
To help make sure no one else does what I did. Zix exchanged glances with Marcus, who nodded slightly. Everyone deserves a second chance, Zix said, extending his hand in the human gesture Marcus had taught him.
Welcome to the coalition. Corax took the hand carefully, clearly moved by the gesture.
I'll earn this, he promised, before walking away.
Well, Marcus said after he left, that was unexpected. You humans have a saying, Zix replied. About actions and words? Actions speak louder than words. Yes. Your actions, that first day, they've been speaking ever since. And others are finally learning the language. 3 days later, the Vortak representative arrived. Ambassador Telex was old, his gray skin bearing the scars of a lifetime of struggle. But, when he met Zix, his 6 eyes brightened with something like hope. "Young Teleran," he said formally, then broke protocol by embracing him. "You've done more for our people with shared sandwiches than our diplomats managed in decades of negotiations." The meeting that followed included not just Vortak students, but representatives from every species on the station. Marcus presented their economic analysis showing how the trade restrictions actually hurt the galactic economy. Ila shared testimonies from Vortak across the sector who'd gone hungry in silence. Even Korax spoke, arguing from a position of reformed strength that diversity made communities stronger, not weaker. "The humans have a concept," Ambassador Telex said during his closing statement, called paying it forward. "They help without expectation of return, trusting that kindness multiplies. We've seen this multiplication here, in this academy. One shared meal became a movement. One act of friendship became a coalition. Perhaps it's time for the Vortak to learn this human concept. Perhaps it's time for all of us to learn it." The negotiations would take months, but the outcome was already clear. The tide had turned, and it had started with a sandwich. Later, much later, when the officials had gone and the excitement had died down, Zix and Marcus sat in their usual spot in the cafeteria. It was late, most students gone for the day, but they'd kept the tradition of sharing an evening snack. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Zix asked, munching on what had become his favorite Earth food pizza, a magical combination of bread, sauce, and toppings that seemed specifically designed for sharing. "Sometimes," Marcus admitted. "Mostly I think about how hungry you looked. How angry it made me that no one else seemed to care. I think about how you didn't hesitate," Zix said. "You just helped. Like it was nothing." "It wasn't nothing. It was everything." Marcus grew serious. "My grandmother, back on Earth, she used to say that the measure of a society is how it treats its most vulnerable. She lived through some rough times, saw what happens when people forget that. She made sure her children and grandchildren remembered. Wise woman. She would have liked you. She had a thing about feeding skinny kids." Marcus smiled at the memory. "She would have stuffed you so full of food you couldn't move." They laughed, the sound echoing in the nearly empty cafeteria. Around them, the academy continued its orbit around a distant star, carrying thousands of young minds from dozens of worlds. But, in that moment, there were just 2 friends, sharing a meal and comfortable silence. A notification pinged on both their devices. A news alert from the Galactic Broadcasting Network: historic treaty signed, Vortak trade restrictions lifted in landmark agreement. Full integration into galactic economy expected within 1 solar year. "We did it," Zix breathed. "You did it," Marcus corrected. "I just provided lunch." "You provided hope," Zix said firmly. "That's much harder to find than food." As they cleaned up their table, another human tradition Zix had adopted, a group of younger students approached hesitantly. First years, by the look of them, a mixed group of species including one very thin Vortak. "Excuse us," one of them said nervously. "Are you really Zix and Marcus? The ones who started the coalition?" "Just 2 students who like sharing lunch," Marcus said with a smile. "You hungry?" The thin Vortak nodded rapidly, and, without hesitation, Zix was already pulling extra food from his pack. He always carried extra now, a habit learned from Marcus. "Sit," Zix said, gesturing to the table. "Let's eat together. And, maybe you can tell us about yourselves. The coalition is always looking for new friends." As the young students sat down, eyes wide with hero worship that would hopefully fade into genuine friendship, Marcus caught Zix's eye. They shared a look of understanding, of pride, of a bond that had grown from simple kindness into something unbreakable. The human had offered his meal without hesitation. The Vortak had accepted with dignity. Together, they changed a small piece of the galaxy.
And, at a table in a space station cafeteria, orbiting a distant star, the work continued. One meal, one friendship, one small act of kindness at a time. Because sometimes, the most powerful force in the universe isn't a weapon or a technology or a grand political gesture. Sometimes, it's just a person willing to share their sandwich with someone who needs it. The stars outside continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the small dramas of organic life. But, on Galactic Academy Station 7, something fundamental had shifted. The powerful had learned to question their power. The weak had learned they weren't weak at all. And, two friends from different worlds had proven that compassion could triumph over prejudice, that kindness could overcome convention, and that sometimes, the smallest gestures could change everything. As the night cycle began and the cafeteria lights dimmed, casting long shadows between the tables, Marcus and Zix helped their new young friends find their dormitories. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to extend the circle of compassion a little wider. But, tonight, no one on Galactic Academy Station 7 would go to bed hungry. And, that, Zix thought as he headed to his own quarters, was how the universe changed. Not with grand proclamations or violent revolutions, but with ordinary people making extraordinary choices. With humans who saw suffering and simply said, "Here, take half of mine." With those who accepted help and turned it into strength. With communities that chose cooperation over competition. The door to his quarters slid shut behind him, but Zix didn't feel alone. He hadn't felt alone since the day 6 months ago when a human had pushed a tray across a table and said the most powerful words in any language, "Let's share."